I met my wife, Caroline, at an overpriced downtown gallery crawl, but truthfully, our life revolved around spreadsheets and the fluorescent hum of office lighting. For years, we talked about leaving the city, but it was just talk. The idea of the change, the fantasy, was always easier than the logistical reality of 2 full-time jobs, condo fees, and the sheer inertia of routine. Then, the perfect storm arrived. Caroline's tech job went permanently remote, and my graphic design firm, already wobbly, dissolved entirely, leaving me unemployed with a sizable severance package more than enough to cover the move. The chaos, the noise of Chicago, the crushing weight of the daily commute, it all became unbearable, suffocating. Caroline was the one who found the listing. "Nate," she'd called out one evening, her laptop balanced on her knees, the screen glow throwing a sudden, desperate light onto her face. "Look at this. Out in the Appalachians. It's perfect." I leaned over her shoulder, expecting a standard A-frame cabin, but what appeared was an old 2-story farmhouse, with deep green shutters, a collapsing porch, and a severe silhouette, framed entirely by the edge of an immense, utterly untouched Appalachian forest. It looked like the kind of place that belonged in a Stephen King paperback. "That looks like the opening scene of a major lawsuit." I laughed, but she only grinned, a slow, meaningful smile. "Or the beginning of something true." Caroline always loved the deep wilderness. She was the one who said that to get to the truth of anything, one had to get where the rules of man broke down. Maybe she was right. Maybe I needed to disappear too. We sold the condo, packed our 2-seater truck, and moved to the quietest place we could afford, the unincorporated hamlet of Pinnacle Creek, West Virginia. Our new home was an archaic relic on 17 acres. It had true character, hand-hewn wooden beams, stone foundation blocks thick with climbing poison ivy, and an immense sense of isolation. It sat at the final, absolute edge of the paved road. The gravel track dissolved a 1/4 mile past our mailbox, ending against the suffocating wall of old-growth trees. It was the kind of place where time felt slower, where the days, heavy with low cloud cover, stretched out long, and the forest pressed in from all sides like a dark, living thing. Caroline was immediately, blissfully obsessed. She spent the first 24 hours simply sitting on the porch wraparound, wrapped in an old woolen sweater, watching the sun dip over the ancient tree line, the quiet sort of deep happiness radiating off her like heat. But the house, and the 7 acres of thick wood surrounding it, felt too still. I instantly knew we were too alone out here. My unease, however, wasn't about the vastness of the trees that pressed in. It was the chilling realization of their absolute silence. I grew up near the suburbs, but I knew what the woods sounded like. The rustle of leaves in a steady wind, the snap of a limb underfoot, the sharp, competing calls of birds in the canopy. Here, the leaves stood utterly motionless. The air was a smothering presence, thick with the weight of low summer clouds that trapped the light. There was no breeze. Not the faintest shift of air. I hadn't realized how much a man relies on the chatter of the background noise, the buzz of unseen insects, until there was genuinely none. I watched Caroline, expecting her to see the eerie lack of life I felt gripping my lungs, but she only smiled, stretching her legs out on the porch swing. "It's perfect, Nate," she murmured. It didn't feel perfect to me. And the only other resident in our small family agreed with my assessment of the silence. Bear, our half-Australian shepherd, a dog who lived for any excuse to run, confirmed the terror. When we arrived, he had explored the yard with frenzied, joyful energy, nose to the ground, tail whipping against the porch. But the moment he trotted into the corner of the yard near the dense line of trees marking the forest trail, he stopped. His ears flattened, his enthusiastic, whipping tail coiled slowly down, landing tight between his legs. Then he backed away, a long, slow, agonizing movement, and trotted back to the house, seeking the lowest point under the porch, his eyes locked on the forest edge as if tracking a silent, gigantic predator. I tried to coax him forward. "He's just not used to the mountain air." I had laughed, but my gut ached with the knowledge that this was not normal fear. Emily sighed. "He'll get used to it." And when she turned back to the absolute stillness of the trees, I swear, Just for a microscopic moment, the air where she was looking shimmered. Not the wind. There was no wind. But something felt like it shifted deep in the dark. Caroline, despite being newly settled, was always decisive. Less than a week after the move, she was focused on exploration. She announced, one morning, that she was going hiking alone. "I'll be fine," she assured me, lacing up an expensive pair of new, untouched leather boots. "I just want to get a feel for the local ecosystem. I'll map a simple loop." I felt that same gut feeling twist into an ugly knot. "Just don't go past the creek at the bottom of the long slope," I pleaded, giving her the arbitrary instruction of a man who no longer felt in charge. She kissed my chin and was gone before I could get any further warning out. By early afternoon, she was already late. By late afternoon, panic had replaced logic. I walked the 100 feet to the spot where our dirt drive met the wilderness, screaming her name into the unnatural quiet. By early evening, the sun had already dipped below the ridge line, drenching the vast, terrifying wood in thick, orange and purple gloaming. I was reaching for the keys to my truck to call the only state trooper I knew the number for, when I saw her. She came out of the woods. I knew immediately that the simple version of reality had snapped. She moved too slowly, her gait unnaturally precise, as if walking was a difficult, recently learned afterthought. Her skin looked pale, almost damp, but her forehead was glistening profusely with sweat, a physiological contradiction. While her clothes were dirt-streaked and damp, there was no tear, no sign of having fallen. But her heavy, new hiking boots, despite days without rain, were soaked, darkened with moisture as if she had worn them up to the ankle in water. "Caroline, where in heaven's name were you? I was about to call them." I stepped forward, feeling the desperate tremor enter my own body. She looked at me like she was just registering external stimulus, that placid smile plastered on her face. I think I just lost track of some hours. I got turned around." She sounded dazed, like a sleepy child answering a question they didn't really understand. She stepped past me without another word, onto the porch, and headed inside. I stood in the doorway, heart slamming, my entire intuition shrieking something broke back there. She wasn't acting scared, embarrassed, or frustrated, just flat, fundamentally absent. That night, our dog, Bear, began his transformation into alarm bell number 1. He refused to go near her, not even moving from the low, defensive position under the couch. I was sitting on the sofa when he suddenly stopped, his eyes locked squarely onto Caroline, who was reading a book beside the window. He let out that same low, guttural, dry growl of primal predator warning, a noise I never wanted to hear again. Caroline glanced over, frowning superficially. "What's his damage, Nate?" Before I could lie, Bear began to back away, not running, but retreating with a calculated, silent precision, his entire body rigid, tail tucked. He stayed under furniture for the next 2 days. Caroline laughed it off. "He probably just doesn't like my sweater." But she wasn't wearing her sweater, and I had never seen a dog afraid of pure cotton before. It all began small. A mental whisper of unease that the primal part of my brain caught long before the city logic side admitted it. Caroline was the same, but fundamentally not. The changes were subtle enough to keep me constantly arguing against myself, but loud enough to prevent any respite. It was on the second morning, over lukewarm coffee, that the great lie broke into 2 visible pieces. Caroline was sitting across from me, scrolling absently, eating a meticulous bowl of oatmeal. I don't know what subconscious instinct drew my eye, but I noticed it with a horrifying, slow certainty. Her eyes, fixed on the screen, were unnaturally still. I watched her between sips, waiting for the flicker, the human necessity. It didn't come. My stomach filled with cold lead. I kept waiting 30 seconds, a full minute, 90 seconds. Her eyes stayed locked open, wide, glassy, reflecting the cold light of her phone's screen. She hadn't blinked. "Are you okay, Caro?" I forced the words out, trying to keep my voice light, casual. She looked up at me, slowly, lazily, perfectly. "Yes, why?" And although the conversation started the muscles controlling her face, she didn't blink once while holding my terrified, desperate gaze. No reason, I finished, suddenly having reached the limit of my human endurance. On top of this, her physical grace deteriorated into a terrifying mimicry of life. Caroline had always been fluid, quick, a person comfortable in her own architecture. But now, it was like she was constantly running an internal diagnostics check. We were lying in bed, exhausted silence filling the room. She lifted the cover, slid under, and then suddenly froze. Her hand, about to pull the blanket tight, hovered in absolute midair, fingers slightly curled. She didn't breathe, she didn't flinch, she didn't react to my presence. She stayed like that for close to 10 seconds, an eternity of arrested motion, until she finished the process with the slow, terrifying, unbothered precision of a robot completing its movement program. The cold was the final, obvious warning. She had always sought heat. Now, touching her was like touching a gravestone. It was a casual brushing of fingers passing in the hallway that week, and the contact made my gut drop to the floor. Her skin was stone cold. Not cool, not brisk, but like cold granite. Her pulse was almost imperceptible beneath the skin. When I asked if she was cold, she only smiled, tilting her head slightly, then replied, "No." I watched the skin of her arms for goosebumps, watching for the involuntary physiological response of a human body fighting the cold atmosphere. Nothing. Even more unnerving, as she stood on the porch in the bitter early morning air watching the tree line, the cold should have made her breath easily visible in white clouds. There was nothing. The warmth that animated all life was gone. I knew I needed help, an outside witness. I decided to make one last, foolish, external call for sanity. I drove into town and went straight to the general store. I just needed a normal conversation, a human point of reference. The old man who ran the counter, the one with eyes the color of old, weathered iron, was sitting on a bench outside. I nearly blurted the whole truth out of sheer panic, but managed to distill it into, "My wife went hiking a few days ago. I think she got turned around. And ever since, she's been acting really tired." The man froze entirely. He didn't ask if she was safe. He pushed my bag toward me, his hands shaking slightly. His eyes were scanning the street as if he expected a sudden, swift intervention. "You should be careful up there. Something stays in those woods." "What the hell does that mean?" I stammered, demanding a rational explanation. He reluctantly leaned in, his voice a dry, abrasive whisper. "If she came back, she wasn't supposed to. Don't let her stop. Don't let it win her breath." Before I could question him further, he rose with an unsettling physical speed I didn't attribute to his visible age and vanished into the nearest dark alleyway, leaving me completely alone with the full, raw, undigested terror. The ultimate violation came in the dead of the next night. I woke to a suffocating stillness that was not the quiet of the woods, but a profound, expectant silence that felt like the quiet of a waiting room. The sheets beside me were cold. I already knew where she was. Caroline was standing perfectly still by our bedroom window, her back to me, her long cotton nightgown hanging like a shroud. She wasn't moving, breathing, or acknowledging me. She was a statue, a perfectly sculpted sentinel. I forced myself to walk toward her, fighting the terror I had accepted as my personal cage. As I stood behind her, I finally saw the truth, her reflection. In the dark glass, the perfect mirrored image of my wife was silently, violently weeping, tears pouring down her cheeks, shoulders visibly trembling with silent grief, the mouth grimacing in agony. But her physical body, the one I was inches away from, was still, blank, and terrifyingly serene. The body was being inhabited, but the soul was not consenting. "I can't blink," the physical voice whispered, rasping dry. The words broke the silence like old glass. "If I blink, I fall asleep. I forget. I'll go back. They'll have it all." The sheer physical strain of holding back the most basic need of the human eye, to lubricate, to rest, to blink, was winning. Her body was failing. Her eyes were impossibly wide, the white parts red, raw beneath the exhaustion. Caroline, please! Just sit down, rest. I love you. You don't have to keep fighting. I don't want to go back, she screamed, a ragged sob that forced through her cold lips. She looked at me, an agonizing, honest look, and I saw something deep behind the surface of her iris. A shadow, something shimmering, stretching, waiting for the final, mortal surrender. I was never supposed to leave, she gasped, already knowing the terrible, absolute truth. Her exhaustion settled over her like a damp cloak. Her pale lips parted in shallow, agonizing breaths. She swayed, losing the fight to her own biology. Her eyelids fluttered, a tic, an uncontrollable spasm. No! Stay with me! I screamed, grabbing for her, anchoring myself to her impossible weight. Her fingers dug feebly into my shirt, grasping her anchor on life itself. I can't! And then, she blinked. It was one slow, deep, complete blink. The body in my grasp jerked, a silent, physical convulsion that had the finality of an official decree. I felt my arms suddenly grasping nothing. The warm weight I had clung to seconds before, the memory of my wife, vanished instantly. No sound, no physical release, just absolute, terrifying absence. I stumbled back, staring at the empty space where she had been standing. I slowly backed to the mirror, my heart shattering. Her reflection was gone, the tears were gone. A sound broke the suffocating quiet, a dull, familiar thump on the wooden floor. My dog, unconcerned, unhostile, walked out from beneath the dark corner with a lazy wag of his tail and pressed his nose into my outstretched hand. The room was cold, the air was still, and the beautiful, terrible lie of my wife's perfect rest was fully exposed. She had gone back. I knew the total truth then. She had always wanted the profound, unending silence and stasis of those woods. Her struggle inside the human vessel was the cruelest act of love she could perform. And now, the cold silence of the forest outside had claimed another perfect vessel, and I would be left alone forever, listening to the crushing silence, and forever wondering who or what would walk out of those trees next.